Hello and welcome to today's training industry webinar, The Dirty Truth About Upskilling. I'm Liz Spate, Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat window to interact with our speaker with any comments. And as for all those questions, please submit the questions to the Q&A section on your toolbar below. We will address all these comments and questions periodically throughout the event, but during the end at the program of our Q&A section. We would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media. So please follow Training Industry and hashtag TI webinars as you share your favorite takeaways with your colleagues. When the webinar ends, you should receive a short evaluation survey. We always welcome your feedback on things like the content, the speakers, the topics, or anything else you would like to share with us. So be sure to complete that survey after the event. And as always, this webinar will be recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us that will include the link to the on-demand program for you to share with your team. If you've attended one of our programs in the past, thank you so much for joining us again. Don't forget to scan that QR code and let us know how we're doing. We would love the feedback. And if this is your first webinar with us, welcome. At Training Industry, we offer dozens of webinars with subjects ranging from AI, analytics, to onboarding, upskilling, like today, and reskilling. And we cover just about every topic relevant to leaders of training organizations around the globe. And now to get started, let me introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Tom Whelan. He is the Director of Corporate Research at Training Industry. And prior to joining Training Industry, he worked as an organizational consultant, designing and evaluating selection practices and training programs. Tom has also published research in leading journals and presented at the international conferences, and he holds a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from North Carolina State University. And with that, I will pass it along to you, Tom.
Thank you for that introduction, Liz. Let me get my slides going. All right, I believe it is working. Okay. All right, so we're here to talk about the dirty truth or the dirty truths. Hopefully you agree with pluralizing it by the end of this about upskilling. So and what prompted this webinar is the basically the growth of upskilling over the last decade, although it hasn't been quite as long as a decade, and we'll get to that. But at the same token, the idea of what upskilling does is much older than that. But for organizations and for what organizations are trying to do with learning these days, upskilling isn't so much a nice to have anymore, but a necessity that L&D functions need to engage with. So one of the questions that we're going to ask and then hopefully answer over the course of today's webinar is, are we really doing a good job of this? And in the places where we can do better, how do we do better? How do we recognize where those gaps are that we need to fill and affect some positive change in our upskilling programs? So we're going to talk about the state of upskilling and what some organizations are doing maybe right and not so right when it comes to building new skills in the workforce. So to step through what's on the agenda, how we're gonna spend the next roughly 50 minutes. We're going to start with just asking the question, like, what is upskilling anyway? We bandy the term around a bunch, but do we really know what it means? So we're gonna take a stab at that. Then we're going to get into what are companies doing about it? What's the state of upskilling right now? How are organizations delivering this sort of training? Why are they engaging in this as a strategic initiative where they are? Then third, and maybe this is a bit of foreshadowing, we're going to talk about why is it so hard, or why can it be so hard when we're looking at some skills and what it might take to stand some of those up versus different skills that are I don't want to say easier, but maybe there's slightly less headache with getting them up and working. So we're going to try to talk some about that. Then some recommendations on how we can do better, or at least how we can reframe our thinking about upskilling. And hopefully, if I don't run my mouth too long and I watch the clock properly, we'll get some takeaways and have some time left over for Q&A at the end. Okay, so what's prompting this webinar, because this is brought to you by Training Industry, is the fact that we have a new ebook called "Transforming Talent: The Strategic Role of Upskilling in L&D." They are, I think, at the time that we're recording this, they are crossing the I's and dotting the T's as we speak. So this ebook will be available very shortly. Um, but let's jump in on question number one. What is upskilling anyway? And I know some people, know what it is or are doing it, and so you feel like I have a pretty good idea of what it is. But I think it pays to to define our terms kind of at the top. So the way that training industry defines upskilling is it's the process of building upon employees' existing skills and strengths to enhance their skill sets. So the key words in that definition to me and what differentiates upskilling from, say, something like reskilling is the word existing and enhance, because that's really what this is about. Um, because when we talk about upskilling, that's what we're talking about. It's taking what's already there and trying to make it better, trying to say what are employees' current abilities, and what do we need to add on to that, or what do we need to expand so that they can adapt to changes in their current roles. Reskilling is sort of different. That's when you're taking somebody that had one job and then training them to do something related but different. So you're actually trying to change the role more than you are just trying to expand the skill set of the employee. So with upskilling, that what we're focusing on is working on what's already there. Like we're not trying to work with new clay. We're trying to work with what we've already molded to some extent. And sort of as I foreshadowed, it's not new, but it's not old either. As you can see from the line graph on the screen, um, that I do a handy trend line through for fun in blue. Over the last decade, the term upskilling kind of went from it didn't exist in 2013, 2014 to smatterings of it starting in 2015. 2019 it started to pick up some speed, but I think basically through the pandemic, the word upskilling and the concept of organizations engaging in this um, got a lot of popularity. And at least in our opinion, why it's risen in popularity is because of the strategic awareness of what it can accomplish. So, in a lot of ways, this is a reflection of how the importance of training has grown through the pandemic. It's not the only thing that has contributed to the rise in upskilling, and we're going to get to that in the next slide. But I think what this illustrates is the idea of organizations engaging in this, or it being something maybe that stakeholders are talking about, and not that long ago you could have used the word with them and they would look at you like, okay, skills in there somewhere, but I don't know what that means. um like it's becoming more entrenched in the language that we're using around organizational strategy. um that said, it's old. The idea of building upon people's skill is not some new innovation. I mean, it's something that has existed for a long time. I mean, skill acquisition as something that people study, for instance. I mean, that's old. That's not new. So to me, kind of the pivot point of upskilling isn't around sort of kind of what's happening necessarily, or the process of learning that it represents, but what it's doing for the organization, because I think that's sort of the key point for it. Like from our definition, there's existing things, but what's it enhancing? Who is it enhancing it for? What is the meaning of the enhancement? What's the purpose of it? But like I said, there are other factors that have set the stage for the interest in upskilling. And one of those that may or may not be relevant to you and your organization, but I think certainly maybe affects the general temperature and will continue to affect the general temperature of things over time, is the idea that we're moving on to Industry 5.0 now. Industry 4.0, which I feel like most of us are still probably trying to catch up with, was about how do we do digital transformation? How do we put all this technology into the way that we're working, and how do we kind of govern those impacts on the industries themselves? How does it change production processes? How might it alter the role of employees? How do we need to change things for that? 5.0 supposedly is supposedly representing a shift from a focus on the economic value of what organizations do to the societal value. So it's kind of going from welfare to well-being. So a lot of the change in tone, and this is at least partially driven by the European Union. 'Cause they put out 5.0, or defined it 2 years ago. The benefits, as they express them, are improved safety and well-being for employees in the organization, reduced costs due to efficiencies. You end up with empowered workers, a more competitive and robust talent industry. You can get a competitive edge in new markets, and most importantly, and they call this out by name, that isn't really a big part and parcel of Industry 4.0, but in 5.0 they call out adapted training for evolving employee skills. So the idea of where industries are moving, or where sort of the voices that whisper in the C-suite's ear, they're whispering things about, we need to involve employee skill. This is, the worth of the organization is going to be more about, what does it do? How is it sustainable? How does it empower and promote employees' talents and skills? How do we harness their talents and skills in the best way? Rather, so little more listening bottom up than I think dictation from top down. Now, I mean, obviously it'll work better in some places than others, but I think for what it's worth, between the pandemic kind of creating a whole bunch of in some cases reskilling needs, but in many instances upskilling needs. Just people needed to learn how to use pieces of software better so they could still do their jobs. Um, that combined with things like Industry 5.0, it's like the whole the the vibe, the stance towards training and skills training in general, I think has changed from where it was a couple years ago, say in 2018, when there'd be some discussion about upskilling and what organizations were doing. So the temperature is very different than it used to be. But still beyond that, I mean, there's other things that affect upskilling. I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of data and privacy and cybersecurity regulations. Um, you know Companies need to stay on top of that, make sure that they don't have any leaks in the dam anywhere. So to the extent that companies need to make sure that they're keeping pace with all those regulations, upskilling is can be very very badly needed, and motivate organizations to kind of meet those needs. Other things, industry specific changes. I mean, if we think about industries like healthcare or finance or transportation, each have their own kind of thorny sets of regulations to navigate. Those regulations can change frequently. They don't all change for the same reasons in all the same places. So why would you need to have employees maybe expand their skills, or take what they already know and try to do more with it? Could be something isolated to a particular industry and not necessarily widespread across everybody that we might talk to. Pardon me. The next one is AI literacy. I mean, especially in the past 2 years, this has I think sort of taken over the discussion of digital transformation, and like, do we have our employees with the computer skills that they need to have? I feel like the roar of that has died down a little bit and been replaced by, do people know how to use AI? Are they using it right? Are they following best practices? Are they verifiably using it to improve their job roles? So to the extent that people need to learn how to use these tools, and also because these tools can do a whole bunch of different things. So just learning one application doesn't mean you can then port that knowledge everywhere else that you might want to. So that's certainly something driving some of the upskilling. This sort of goes in hand with some of the lingering effects of the pandemic, but just remote work. The I mean, I've loved to joke for years, like how many jobs can you find nowadays where you don't have to use a computer or you don't have to have, some baseline level of computer skill. And I think as some work has moved remote, the number of pieces of software and the number of different things that you need to be able to take care of yourself with a computer changes when you have to do remote work. I mean, like yes, you can like remote screen in IT help, but you gotta kind of know how to at least get to that so that they can help you. So to the extent that as I like to sometimes joke that the great sweatpantsing led a lot of people to work remotely, that led to the need for a lot of new skills to be developed. Um, and then lastly, I think a factor that has affected certainly how some organizations are approaching upskilling is those that are trying to introduce communities of practice and lean on what's called open pedagogy or goji, however it's pronounced. But the idea of that is that you have learners actively involved in making materials via what's called renewable assignments. So like say think something like Wikipedia. Like yes, it's a resource, but lots of people can contribute to it. The idea with open pedagogy is you have learners engaged in that. So that rather than learning being a passive experience that they just sort of absorb and maybe pay attention to, it's more of a hands-on, pay it forward type of experience where they're building and adapting and evolving and updating the learning materials as time goes on. It doesn't happen everywhere. It's it doesn't won't work as well for some topics as it will for others. But I think that is changing the way that organizations approach a lot of this. Okay, so let's get into the second part. What are companies doing now that we've sort of defined in excess what upskilling is and what it's not. Let's talk about what organizations are doing. How are they having their employees learn? So first, here we're looking at like basically just a snapshot of just in general how does training work nowadays? Is it in person? Is it remote or virtual? Is it somewhere in between? What's the balance of that? And as you can see from on the screen, there's a third of people that are kind of fully hybrid, balanced between some of it's in person, some of it's through a screen. Another third that's almost fully in person again. You have a fifth that's hybrid, but it's mostly in person. And then maybe just, like under 15% overall, that's kind of on the hybrid side. So the learning experience, so, how employees are coming to the organization and being taught things nowadays. Um, I mean, is it likely to be in person? Yeah, this suggests it probably is. But if we think about the totality of their experience, this suggests that for at least two-thirds of employees, yeah, they're going to have some in-person stuff, but there's also going to be virtual smatterings of things in there. And you might be wondering, Tom, why are you talking about this? So why does this matter? How skill development is attempted through various delivery formats matters to the behavioral outcomes on the back end. So some things there's no way to do them but in person. Other, so if you try to teach somebody those skills through a virtual means or a virtual delivery, you're probably going to have withering results, or at least you're not going to maybe get at the outcomes and see the outcomes on the job that you're hoping for. There's other skills where it's very easy to teach them virtually. And in some cases, depending on what the skill is, you want to teach it virtually because it's way easier to scale up that way. So if you need to deliver, skills training to a large population of employees, depending on what it is, like you want to sort of steer away from in-person type engagements, only to save resources. So how employees are learning. I think makes a difference as it has a bearing on how employees learn skills. Because obviously I'm leading into things next. We have some data on how employees are learning skills. Um, And I mean, I'm not going to read out the list to everybody. You can read it. But from my perspective, the top two are a bit suspect. Not all the time, but and the next two are spot on, right? So video courses and instructor-led training. For a lot of things, fine. For anything where maybe hands-on uh, experience is important, or where somebody needs to be immersed in an environment where they need to make decisions, something like that, a video course isn't going to cut it. An in-person classroom experience might, depending on the structure of it. But sort of in general, just oh, you need to learn a skill. Here's some video courses. It's it's not it's not going to have the impact that other delivery modalities are. Um, and that's why I say the top two are suspects. The following two, though, test assessments of relevant skills and experiential learning, are spot on. Experiential learning, obviously, I mean, this is things like workshops, simulations, things like that. If you're trying to get somebody to build a skill and you can put them somewhere where they get to exercise that skill and fail and make mistakes, and then you can give them feedback on those mistakes and push them right back out to make new mistakes in a safe, controlled environment. Those sort of learning experiences are going to be good, or really going to be the best, at building a variety of different types of skills. And then testing or assessing relevant skills. It may not seem to make sense at first, but nerdier researchers than how much of a nerd I am, have done a lot of looking at this, and I've actually found that when you test and retest somebody on a skill, especially if it's something skill based, that's in a lot of cases as good or can be better than re-exposing them to the learning content. So the more opportunities that you give someone to demonstrate that they know how to do something or know the steps or understand the logic of what's behind something, the act of taking a test on it consolidates learning. So tests or assessments of relevant skills is at least from in my opinion, a good way to try to get employees to learn things. Um, and one of the points I wanted to underscore in terms of where organizations are at, is this overlay of basically two separate questions in this survey that we ran with 350 learning leaders earlier this year. And so what we're looking at is the ratings for how effective is your training overall. That's the blue line, versus ratings of how effective is your skills training. Pardon me, in the green line. And so the same structure of question, but didn't ask them one right after the other. So so people were thinking about different things in between. But what you see from overlaying these things is that we're not any better at upskilling than we are at training in general. So it's not like, oh, all our check the box training and all the stuff that we just deliver have available or accessible, and maybe some of it's not mandatory and all, like how effective all of that is. I mean, it involves a lot of low rent stuff. So, I mean, I'm lightly making fun of it. But skills training, you would think if there's a skill that's important for employees to have in their job, well, that training should be fairly decent, should it not? And what this chart suggests is kind of on the whole, we're really not any better. I mean, this suggests we're a little bit worse, very slightly. But I think that's an important point to underscore, that when it comes to sort of where organizations are with this, I mean, I guess it's good that it's not drastically more terrible than sort of general training. Um, but still, this might be something where, especially given the chart of the rising popularity that we saw, a few slides ago, you might hope that this chart would tell more of a positive story. But to me, what it says is we have work to do. Um, but for as much of a cynical story as this, or as I might be telling right now, I'm optimistic, I think, about where we can go with it, because again, the popularity of upskilling is rising. I think there's a lot more tools that learning functions have in place now compared to maybe how many they had in place 5, 10 years ago to tackle skills challenges and meet skill gaps and use training as something to steer the organization strategically. So I'm hopeful for where this can go. But at least as far as where are we at now, we're 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 not doing any better than kind of any random training that you might pick. Or if you ask, an employee is what should be a more immersive, maybe more central to their job learning experience, is that any better than a compliance training that they have to do every year? This says some of them are going to be like, it's all the same to me. Now that said, before I'm bashing too unfairly organizations, like what's being done to build skills. So what actions are organizations taking, or what are they already doing to build their employee skills? So in terms of that, like, I mean, I'm we're from the last slide, kind of tracking right with the first two. Providing access to online learning platforms so that the people can find learning materials on select topics, and providing on-site or in-person training. Um, so I'm tracking with the first two. The third one's a little disappointing from the perspective of L&D, where it's like, oh, we need to build skills. Well, just buy them. Just let's recruit people that already have some of these skills. Um, that said, is it disappointing? Because I mean, obviously, recruiting new skills in the organization does make it easier to build on them. If you're trying to do specific things. But the point I want to make about this is with the first two, because to me is access enough. So giving people access to platforms online where they can learn things, giving them, standing up in-person classes and trying to get people to sign up. Our organization is really doing enough to build skills. My hunch is no, but I'm also admittedly speaking from a place of, like, what's best in a best possible world hypothetical scenario, because it matters why organizations are upskilling in the first place. And for that, you might be wondering, well, I hope you have data on that. I do. So here we asked, these same 350 learning leaders, to what extent is their company's need to upskill employees driven by all these different reasons? And as you can see, there's some differences in the rating, but it's all over the place. And what that says to me is it's not just one thing. That there's not one main strategic driver that upskilling is supposed to be pushing. There's not one lever that it gets used for in the organization. So functionally, what the organization intends for upskilling to accomplish for them drives what resources they devote to it and how much attention it may get. So for example, tackling several of these is going to warrant a much more robust upskilling strategy. So if it's our job roles are evolving. There's things going on with the external market. There's new regulations that we have to keep up with. We have a generation of developers, for instance, aging out and new ones coming in, and we have to make sure that there's continuity of we can keep everything running. Like if you're trying to do all that with upskilling, well, that probably demands a different strategy than if mostly what you're driving at is the reason here, where it's training is an employee perk. Because if what you're trying to accomplish, if the outcome you're driving for is, do people see this as a perk? Does it help drive retention? Well, then just providing online access to online learning libraries might be enough. So that it's the gesture that's important, less so than the employees actually engaging with the upskilling training. So even if the reasons are underpowered, or even if the organization could do more, what they're doing, or what they're shooting for can vary, as we can see on the screen. But is it that what we're aiming for all the time, is the minimum effective dose on purpose? Because I feel like that suggests that skills training is easy to dial in. And you could probably already tell I'm going there. Let's talk about why that's not usually the case. Why I don't think it's easy to dial in, or what makes it maybe deceptively difficult to dial in sometimes. And so why even aiming at some of these outcomes can be a bit of a challenge. All right, so let's talk about why is it so hard, or at least from my chair with my background, how I understand it to be able to get hard. And to begin with, I'm going to start with something maybe a little weird. It's a quote from a neuroscientist from the 80s named David Marr. And he's at least among neuroscientists, he's famous for this quote where he said, "Trying to understand perception by understanding neurons is like trying to understand a bird's flight by studying only feathers." And the idea here is what's called the I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but the mereological, there we go, mereological fallacy. And it's this idea that sometimes we confuse whole part relationships, basically mistaking a part of something as being representative of the whole thing. And so the point that I'm trying to get at here is, if we're trying to understand all the skill-based components of a job, understanding something is different than just being able to describe it, which is, I think, where, like a lot of job analysis and job leveling activities kind of get us. If we can describe it, cool. How much do we understand it? How much, this is most important, how much do we know how to intervene to change it? So do we understand, or do we have a deep enough, uh, line of sight into different employees' jobs to understand where are the points where we need to intervene with skills-based training, and what is going to get us the outcomes that we're looking at. And I have this quote on the screen, and I'm kicking this horse on purpose, because I feel like it's very easy you know to to talk about skills training and then get very, very focused in on that particular skill as representative of maybe everything that the employee is about, or a main part of their job. And in a sense, an analogy that helps get this point across is chess. Like, you can understand the game of chess. You don't need to know anything about what the chessboard is made out of or what the pieces are made out of. So there's pockets of knowledge that you just don't need to understand how to work with something. So when we talk about skill components in a job, these skills are often not detached modular components that we can remove, fix, and then replace in the employee, in isolation from other skills, right? Human skill is a system, so the process of building and expanding skills is planting a seed and nurturing that skill to grow, rather than, and that's what it's about, rather than just confirming some approach to mastery or something like that. So I think to think about skill, you almost necessarily have to zoom out. Otherwise, you run the risk of mistaking the part for the whole. But still, I feel like there's a question in all of this of what is a skill really? And so I'm going to borrow a definition from a different set of neuroscientists. Because again, like, how we define upskilling is process of building upon employees' existing skills and strengths to enhance their skill set. So what is the skill thing that's so important to that definition? And the three key features, one is that the employee or the learner, knows how to select and then move through whatever sequence of events, whatever movement, whatever it is that consciously, it's a decision-making skill that they build, where they can select a course of action, or select how to chart a course of action through a problem. So that's something that is demonstrative. They should be able to express it. They should be consciously thinking about it. And that's one feature of a skill. Another feature is that you've built some sort of improved speed or improved accuracy of whatever it is. So it's not just that they're making, an optimized decision. It's that they're able to, almost like do their own differential diagnosis, and weigh a whole bunch of factors and arrive at an optimal decision that much faster, or that much more accurately, or that much more thoroughly considered. And this is largely something that's unconscious. You're not going to be able to get them to talk about maybe how they got there. They're going to get there. They can explain where they got, but the process is a little more kind of under the waves. And then the third key feature is that of a skill is that the learner or whatever has reduced errors and streamlined variability in what they're doing. I mean, obviously reducing errors, that's kind of the whole point. But streamlined variability is maybe a little more troubling to dance with, because it's easy, I think, to assume that, to reduce errors, you also want to reduce variability. So if somebody needs to react in a situation a certain way every time, or execute a series of movements, or key presses, whatever it might be, and you want them to not make any errors while doing that. I mean, that's obviously the point of the training, but to a degree, when you remove their opportunity for variability in how they get there, then you remove the problem solving component, because their skill, to the extent that you build it, is them, like they're going to have it, but the environment where they might need to exercise it can be very different. So if they're not able to adapt and vary where they need to, they're not going to, basically stuff isn't going to work right. The skill demonstration you were hoping for, or the performance behavior that you wanted, might fall short. So, and again, that's also something that you can't necessarily get them to articulate. It's again more under the waves. So basically, like, per this definition, like, only one of these three things can you kind of have the person bark back at you. Everything else you have to get them to demonstrate. And so the key point, I think, is what we're building when we're building a skill isn't merely an understanding of something, but a knowing of doing. And we'll talk more about that over the next couple slides. But to further try to illustrate this point, I wanted to take us through uh, something that I adapted from another article by a Johns Hopkins researcher named John Krakauer. Um, and what the point I will make is kind of, when we're talking about skill training, what is it we're trying to change? So if what we're trying to establish in training is for employees to think about, um, and use their skills, well, what is it? Are we trying to change thought, or are we trying to change behavior? Are we trying to change thought and behavior? Which of those two things is kind of the target of the training? Um, and so I thought a fun illustrative way to think about this, and to think about in a lot of ways why skill training can be a bit difficult to deal with, is because what we like to assume, well, let me explain the first one. So you have, all the different possible brain activity patterns. It's all the, thought processes and things that result in employee behavior. So when we're trying to affect a skill, optimally, what we want to be able to do is say, all right, we want them to think about something a specific way, or execute a series of movements, or step through a task a certain way. And so we want them to think about it like this. And the hope is, you get them to think one way, you will get the specific behavior on the other end. And you might have them demonstrate both in training to make sure that you can find evidence of both. The problem is, it's nothing really works like that. You can have situations like in B, where there's multiple different ways that an employee might be able to think about something or approach something that will result in the same behavior. So you can get the same performance outcome you're looking for, but you might not have to dictate, or you might not be able to dictate the path that employees think through to get there. And then the other kind of nightmare scenario is pattern C, where you get them to think one way, but from that pattern of thought, or that framework of understanding of how they're supposed to do something, multiple different behaviors can come out the back end. So if you're only training to the thought process, you might not have any control over the behavioral outcomes at the other end. I mean, so obviously the point of putting all this up, um, is that well, there really is no answer for this. So we have to do the best we can. And that's not just like a general like, oh well, we're just not good enough for it in L&D. It's true up and down anything like for instance in the case of the roundworm, we know the genome of it, we can name all the cell types, we know how they're all connected together, every single cell, how they're all connected, we know all of it, and despite all of that we don't know why the worm behaves the way it does. So I think when we're talking about how are we building skill, what is it we're changing, we're not going to know all these linkages. But to that same end, we can't fool ourselves into thinking that we're making these linkages all the time and that they're going to be ironclad, and that what we might be dealing with, we hope for scenario A, what we might be dealing with is B or C, could depend on the employee, who knows. But I think when we think about skills training and we think about, oh, it should just be, map this onto that, it's not always the case. And in case it just sounds like I'm sour grapes, let's talk through some actual versus desired impacts of skills training. And I think the contrast of what we all hope, how we all talk about it, and then what tends to actually happen in a lot of real world instances, I think can shed some light, or connect some of the dots in some of the things that I've been talking about so far. So first, what you hope skills training does is improves productivity for everybody. And what usually tends to happen is, yeah, that works for some people and some people struggle. So even when you implement it, you're not going to get the same result on the back end. Next thing, you want skills training to, build greater innovation across all departments where you administer the skills training. And the more likely truth is that that innovation is probably going to be sporadic, and it's probably going to be isolated to those that can apply the new skills, or have the opportunity to think about them or use them. Or if, if because if there's no way for them to innovate, if you're giving them a hammer and a screwdriver and saying, do floral arrangement, like they don't have the right tools for the task. So if you want them to innovate, they have to be set up right. Next, a desired impact is it promotes employee retention and satisfaction, like we saw a couple slides ago. Sometimes what happens is, yeah, for some employees, they may see it as a perk, and it may be one of the things that gives them warm and fuzzy feelings in their stomach and helps them stay with the company. For other people, that same training may be irrelevant to what they do. They may look at it as, some breadcrumbs on their trail of this company doesn't care about me, or my job isn't important to this company because, I'm supposed to do this new thing over here and I don't see how any of this connects. Like they're wasting my time. Um, Next, the desired impact of skills training is, fosters adaptability to change. The organization can be more agile. And I think what often happens is employees struggle to adapt new skills, to tackle, new or evolving problems. And especially if training isn't supported enough on the back end, if managers aren't on board with it, if there maybe isn't resources, follow-up resources. So if it's something they need to practice, or would make them more comfortable to practice before they have to do it for real, and post training you can provide them that opportunity. Without some of those things, you might have employees kind of miss the mark, even if the training was great, even if they performed well at the end of the training event. And then lastly, sort of as I've already been bagging on a couple slides ago, the desired impact is that skills training drives fewer errors and higher standards in the quality of work, and sometimes that doesn't really turn out that way. Improvements might be more incremental rather than being dramatic, and when those impacts all happen, can vary. It's not necessarily all going to be on the same sheet of music of let's all do better. I also think there's a nefarious gap between knowledge and skill that from an L&D perspective, we're wise to stay keen about. And so just to give a kind of a quick overview, knowledge is the acquisition of factual information or a theoretical understanding. It's relevant to whatever the employee does, like stuff they need to know, but it's things about stuff. It's not how to do things. And that's what a skill is. Skill is an ability. So and it's something that needs to be shaped and molded through practice and experience. Often involves motor functions, doesn't have to. Usually is going to involve some sort of spatial or sequential or relational understanding of some sort of common job task. So even if it's how do I relate to other people? How do I communicate, to customers, something like that. There's some, it doesn't matter if it's social or if they're, what how do I use this particular programming language to do this? Like no matter what it is, there's some sort of understanding that involves a how to rather than a what is this. Now, what makes this, I think, muddy for a lot of people is you can't really separate them. They're different, but you can't really pull them apart. Continuous skill improvement. I'm quoting the same neuroscientist from a few slides ago. Continuous skill improvement is guided by application of knowledge about facts. So you need not just knowledge of what something is, but how you need to use it, when you need to use it, and with what means to perform tasks. So there's you can give people a lot of knowledge about their job, but there's things where they need to know how, when, and what am I doing in order to do it. And maybe an easier way to display this, I put it's almost the five W's. Who is missing, but so it's almost the five W's. But I thought this provides a good contrast between what I'm talking about in terms of knowledge versus skills. For knowledge training, you can teach people all about the what. You can name everything, try to explain how it all works. You explain why the training is important. Like why are they doing the training? But you might not give them any idea of when they need to use it, or at least you're not going to be able to demonstrate and have them know the demonstration of when they need to use it. They're not going to know where to use it. You have them in a training environment, usually, away from the job. So the where is irrelevant. And then the how, they're not going to be able to get a sense of if all you're giving them is knowledge. Like, yeah, you can give them the steps, but they all they know is the steps. They have knowledge about the steps, not knowledge about actually how to do the thing they're doing. Whereas skills training, you give them the what, they get the why, just like a knowledge training. But the when to use it becomes a lot more clear. The where, again, not supposed to be as relevant because you should be able to take people out of the job context and train them in another context. But then most importantly, the how do you do things? What happens when you make mistakes? How do you accomplish this task? What do you need to watch out for? You can explain that to people, but you need them to experience it for them to get an understanding of how to use that skill and how to apply what you're trying to teach them. And then very quickly, I wanted to talk through a very bad case study. And this is in the news right now. There's a doctor who's an osteopathic physician down in Florida, and just made terrible surgical errors that resulted in the death of a 70-year-old man from Alabama. And what was telling to me is in the Florida Surgeon General report, they said that staff had concerns that this physician didn't have the skill to safely perform the procedure. And it ended with a tragic outcome because he didn't know what he was doing. He had ample opportunity to realize the mistake and didn't. Like the guy claimed that the patient's organs migrated to an unusual place. Like organs don't migrate inside your body. And I mean, obviously his license has been suspended. The malpractice suit is pending. The hospital is investigating it. Um, but again, like if somebody doesn't know how to use skills, even if they're skilled in other aspects of their job, even if they've been, I mean, this doctor was at one point, accredited by a medical board of the state. If people aren't staying up on this stuff, it will grow stale, or they're going to make mistakes. And you don't want them making mistakes in the real world. You want them in a training environment where they have the opportunity to demonstrate the skill and screw it up. So then you can correct it in a safe space. Um, all right, so how can we do better? I'm going to start our discussion of how we can do better, kind of calling back to the whole part confusion and hard and soft skills. So the top three skills of increasing importance to organizations, at least per the World Economic Forum, are creative thinking, analytical thinking, and technological literacy. AI really stinks at most of that. Like technological literacy, it can help you with. I mean, like I recommend everybody, like if you haven't used it for coding, like use it for coding. It's great at helping you. But in general, creative thinking, analytical thinking, it's not very good at. So you need subject matter experts. You need to be building subject matter experts in the skills or the tasks that are important to the organization. You can't rely on an AI as a backstop. Um, and also with subject matter experts, the whole thing with hard and soft skills, there's a big importance of are you going to get any of this stuff to transfer or not? Is the skill being taught in a way that an employee can use? Is a delivery modality that you've chosen to try to get people to build a skill the right modality to do so, or should you be using something else? We're all going to have opinions about that, but a subject matter expert is basically, at least in my opinion, kind of the end all be all of will this work or not? Like if I'm doing the job, or if I know the job really well and I understand everything that goes into it, and I understand the importance of the skill to the completion of these tasks. Um, is this the right way to do things? Because if you miss that, or to the extent that you mismatch any of those things because you don't have expert input, the transfer that you're going to realize on the back end of that training, employees actually using the new skill on the job, is going to be weak or prone to more error, or just employees aren't going to be motivated to do any of it because maybe they feel like they haven't had enough of a learning opportunity just based on how they got it or what their experience might have been. So to me, subject matter experts are really, really important for ensuring that transfer happens. So where can we improve? At least from training industry's viewpoint. So one is to recognize and reward upskilling efforts. And the underlying idea with this is you can't forget the learner in this whole story, right? So successful upskilling is not a given simply because you have programs that exist and there's some learners in them. Like you have to give them a cookie, give them some reason to come back, or some reason to make engaging with training kind of part of the culture. So however you need to recognize, however you need to reward people, like you want them to be active participants in the process, and less, somebody that you're reluctantly baiting into attending a training. Second area I think we can improve is trying to make sure you have good analogs for job tasks. Um, because to me at least, engagement with doing is more important than how knowledge-based content is gets presented. So for whatever you need people to learn, what is the task, or at least what's a good approximation of the type of task that you want them to demonstrate the skill on the job, and make sure in the learning environment that they have something that if it doesn't mimic the exact task, it's mimicking the types of decisions that they need to make to exercise whatever the new skill is that you're trying to build. The third is to provide feedback loops for improvement. And this is less like feedback loops with the learner. This is more, just collecting opinions from far and wide, so you get a feel for what needs support now, what might need support tomorrow, next quarter, next year, and so on. And also, whose opinion that is, because, to some degree, decision makers are best positioned to decide, not to know the job. So what are the people on the job saying? I mean, they're also not going to be able to look strategically off in the distance to the same degree, but they might have an opinion on it that's worth weighing, and contrasting against other sources of input. And then lastly, to align skill initiatives with organizational goals. I know that seems easy, and it seems like something I think that gets slapped up as a recommendation with a lot of these things. But I think it's, like, just because you've aligned something doesn't automatically make it relevant to the employee's job role, um, right now. And I think that's the key. The value doesn't have to be immediate, and it may not be obvious yet to the learner what the value of the training is until they get there. But as it says on the screen, skill building is a precondition for business application. You can't have employees start applying the skill and affecting change in performance and outcomes until they have built it and exercised it a little bit. So you always want to make sure it's aligned. But it's not going to necessarily show up to the learners all the time immediately either. And I think to the extent that we can communicate that, we'll be in the clear. So the next thing we want to talk through is some, how. So the last slide was like, what can we do better? So this is how can we avoid some missteps. And number one, I feel like we need to not treat the symptom. We got to treat the cause of whatever it is. Like I have on the slide, a training that almost meets the need still fails to meet the need. Almost doesn't count. And I have this there because I think it's tempting to use skills training as a bandage for poor performance, rather than seeing it as a medicine that's gonna take care of the root cause. And I think approaching it differently through those two different lens is going to lead you to different conclusions. And it's easy to just run down the short term and be like, oh, people don't know how to use this. We need training on this. Already identified it. Like we're good to go. Let's run. Rather than maybe taking a step back and doing some diagnostics and trying to think through, what do we really need to do here? The next thing is time management. It takes a lot of time. Upskilling has to fit into everything else going on in an employee's day-to-day experience. And learning skills and having the time and space to fail at using them is not easy and breezy to do. So when you're asking for employees' time for these events, I mean, we got to make sure it counts, because it also takes a lot of time for us to figure out the best way to do all this stuff as well. The next one is communication. We have to market training to learners, right? We have to talk to them about training. Like, is the value obvious to them? We can't assume it is. I feel like we need to make and restate that case. And also I think that helps them be in the dark about what's available to them, maybe why some of the training is going on and what it can do for them. And then lastly, how do we avoid missteps? We don't. We try to fail fast and move on to the next thing. And again, this is one of the reasons that subject matter experts are crucial as a guide through all this wilderness, because we're not going to avoid a bad landing here and there, but it's more about a learning culture. Or trying to craft a learning culture, and more about continuing to engage with skills training rather than assuming that every single one of them has to maximize value and every one of them is going to go off without a hitch. It won't, but can't give up just because that might be the case. All right, I've been going on a little too long, but we're at takeaways, so let's let's go through some of the takeaways very quickly. So I hope what you've gotten out of this webinar today is the sense that upskilling isn't new, but it's been steadily growing and expanding against accelerating changes in business. And so the term upskilling kind of represents the strategic role that skills training can have for a lot of organizations. And I mean, it doesn't seem like it's the temperature of that is coming down at all. Also, hopefully, I hope you came away with, organizations aren't necessarily doing better at this compared to other forms of training. So to the extent that it's business critical to the things that we're trying to do, it's something that warrants maybe a little bit more elbow grease or more attention, say, than some other forms of training. I think as we saw, the drivers for why organizations engage in this are multifaceted, and seek to accomplish a lot of different objectives. Uh, and from all my blathering in the middle about knowledge training versus skills training, I hope you agree that it has critical differences from other types of learning that increase sometimes how difficult it can be to deliver skills training, or to deliver skills training at least in a way where you see the outcomes on the back end that you were hoping to get out of it. And then lastly, just as a takeaway, between making sure you have experts in the process, and thinking through the strategy, uh, and making considered decisions about why and how you're communicating with learners and all that sort of things. To the extent that you can do that, that boosts your chances of success, rather than just kind of thinking from the top. It seems like people need this sort of training, and then you just, push it out and hope things change. All right, again, this was this or wasn't an exact duplicate. It was kind of supplementary information to a new ebook that we have coming out on upskilling, that I hope everybody checks out. We also have a lot of training industry resources. We have a podcast that is now a video podcast, and if you look it up, you'll see my face again talking about measurement. We also have a magazine. We have top 20 awards, and a directory of companies. A lot of different research reports, and everything from the learner experience to L&D technology, and everything in between. And also, if you wanted to upskill yourself, we have a certification in training management, as well as a bunch of workshops and certificates available. And with that, I guess I left us 1 minute. Sorry, Liz. With that, we're at the end.
It's all good. It's all good. I guess the main thing that I've seen from the audience is like, where is this research coming from? Where is this research coming from? Where is this research coming from? So just to confirm that all the research that you talked about in this PowerPoint, is it from this ebook that's going to be coming out?
Much of it, yes. So what I covered, like in the slides on the data that we collected, some but not all of it is in the ebook, and the ebook goes into more detail about like the strategic reasons, or the strategic initiatives that organizations set up. So there's more in the ebook than what I covered here today. But all the section in the middle where we're looking at charts of like what are organizations doing right now, that all comes from 2024 training industry data. And anything else that I was bringing in, I tried to cite in the slides, because I was citing a few nerdy sources in there.
Gotta love nerdy sources. So I hope that clarified all the people who were asking about where's this research from. I feel like there was a few slides and I knew you were gonna plug in that ebook at the end. So I hope that answered all the questions. There were a few that we couldn't get to because we're all out of time, but is there anything left you would like to leave with the audience before we say our goodbyes?
Mm, Outside of just thanks for being here. I hope this was useful to people, and gave you some food for thought on m- maybe upskilling seems scarier now, but if it is, hopefully it seems like a monster that's a little bit easier to tackle.
Love that. Love that. And with all the other additional plugs, we do have some more up and coming webinars this month. You can register now for these programs and watch past webinars now at trainingindustry.com. And all of our webinars are pre-qualified for a credit hour by HRCI, SHRM, ISPI, and CPTM. Kind of like Tom mentioned, but I'll even go even further about the Certified Professional and Training Management Program. It helps you assist in developing core competencies that will empower you to manage the future training needs of your organization. So you can find more at trainingindustry.com/training. Additionally, we have officially announced registration for TICE next year. So if you go now, it is the earliest and the cheapest the ticket will ever be. So I definitely suggest checking that out. And additionally, I do want to just take a moment to thank Tom. I also want to say to check out that evaluation survey. It should have popped open in another tab in your browser, and we would love to hear your feedback. Thank you for our sponsor, aka Training Industry. But lastly, thank you all for your time and attention today. I hope to see you next time, and I hope you stay safe from all the bad weather and storms. Bye, everybody.